Hey, happy Monday, everyone. I'm Charlotte. This is Quarantine Story Time. We've been reading War and Peace during shelter in place from COVID-19. This is your first time here. Welcome. Welcome back to those who've been tuning in. You can always check out the playlist on my channel to catch up on anything you may have missed. And just an update, I will not be able to read live from Thursday onward. Starting this week. So today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, live readings at 3 o'clock, like normal. But then on starting Thursday, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the readings pre-recorded in the morning or in the evening the night before, and put them up on the channel in the morning on the day of the read. So they'll be live. They won't be live, but they'll be posted on the channel on the first page. And they'll also be in the Warren playlist as of the morning of the day of the reading. So you guys can go ahead and check it out that way. So you can still read it. You can still listen to it at 3 if you like. You can still leave comments on the videos, and you can still read it whenever, or listen to it, watch it whenever you want. But I just won't be able to be live at 3 from Thursday onward. So yeah, but we're making a lot of progress. Starting today, and we're in volume 2, but we're starting part 4 today of volume 2. So right with section 1. And if you remember where it ended before, we were talking about Princess Maria wanting to be a wanderer, a religious wanderer. And Prince Andrei has declared his intention of marrying Natasha Rostov. And and he had to go away for a year because his father wanted him to spend a year away. So he engaged himself to Natasha in secret, so only her family knows. But she is allowed to be free in case she doesn't want to be engaged to him for that whole year, and she finds someone else. 6 months have gone by. He's hoping his dad will relent and let him come back and marry her instead now rather than waiting another 6 months. But his dad is not giving in, and instead is being ridiculous and talking about wanting to marry this friend of his daughter's, Mademoiselle Bourrienne, who's like this French woman who they've been taking care of. His dad's just getting like more and more agitated and sort of aggravated in his old age. So anyways, that's where we've kind of left off, is that Pierre seems sort of like happy for his friend, but also like it makes him depressed because his friend is finding this new lease on life and new love, and meanwhile he's still with his wife, who he doesn't like really have a close relationship with anymore. So yeah, kind of where we are. If I miss anything, let me know. Hope everyone's been staying safe. Hope you got to celebrate Juneteenth. Also, always check out links in the profile for ways to get involved. So thanks. So without further ado, let's get started. Part 4, Section 1. Biblical tradition says that absence of work, idleness, was the condition of the first man's blessedness before his fall. The love of idleness remained the same in the fallen man, but the curse still weighs on man, and not only because we must win our bread in the sweat of our face, but because our moral qualities are such that we are unable to be idle and at peace. A secret voice tells us that we should feel guilty for being idle. If man could find a condition in which, while idle, he felt that he was being useful and fulfilling his duty, he would have found one side of the primordial blessedness. And this state of obligatory and irreproachable idleness is enjoyed by an entire class, the military. In this obligatory and irreproachable idleness consists and will consist the chief attraction of military service. Nikolai Rostov experienced this blessedness to the full as he continued service after 1807 in the Pavlogradsky Regiment, where he was already a squadron commander, having taken over from Denisov. Rostov had become a bluff, good-natured fellow whom his Moscow acquaintances would have found slightly mauvais genre, of the wrong sort, but who was loved and respected by his comrades, subordinates, and superiors, who was content with his life. Lately, that is 1809, in letters from home, he often found complaints from his mother about that their affairs were falling into worse and worse disorder, and that it was time for him to come home to bring joy and peace to his old parents. Reading these letters, Nikolai experienced a fear that they wanted to make him leave the milieu in which he lived calmly and peacefully, protected from life's confusion. He felt that sooner or later he would have to enter the deep water of life again, and with its affairs disordered and straightened out, with its steward's accounts and its quarrels, intrigues, connections, with its society, with Sonia's love and his promise to her. All this was terribly difficult, confused, and he answered his mother's letters with cold classical ones that began, Ma chérie maman, and ended, Votre obéissant fils, and omitted saying when he intended to return. In 1810, he received letters from his parents in which they informed him of Natasha's engagement to Bolkonsky, and that the wedding would take place in a year because the old prince was against it. This letter upset and insulted Nikolai. First of all, he felt sorry that Natasha, whom he loved most of all in the family, would be leaving home. Second, from his hussar point of view, he was sorry that he was not there to show this Bolkonsky that connection with him was by no means so great an honor, and that if he loved Natasha, he would do without the permission of his crack-brained father. For a moment, he hesitated with whether he should not ask for leave in order to see Natasha as a fiancée, but then came maneuvers, considerations with Sonia about the confusion, and Nikolai put it off again. But in the spring of that year, he received a letter from his mother, written in secret from the Count, and this letter persuaded him to go. She wrote that if Nikolai did not come and take things in hand, their property would be sold at auction, and they would all go begging. The Count was so weak, so trusting in Mitenka, and so kind, and everyone deceived him so that it was all getting worse and worse. For God's sake, I beg you, come at once, if you don't want to make me and your whole family miserable, wrote the Countess. This letter made an impression on Nikolai. He had the common sense of mediocrity, which told him what he ought to do. Now he ought to go, if not into retirement, then at least on leave. Why he had to go, what he did not know. But having slept after dinner, he gave orders to saddle his grey Mars, a long, unridden, and terribly ill-tempered stallion, and returning home with the stallion all in lather, he announced to Lavrushka, Denisov's footman, who had remained with Rostov, and the comrades who came in the evening that he was taking a leave and going home. Difficult and strange as it was for him to think that he would go without having learned from staff what especially interested him, whether he was to be promoted to captain or get an Anna for the last maneuvers. Strange as it was to think that he would go without selling to Count Golchowski a troika of greys that the Polish Count wanted to buy, and that Rostov had bet he could sell for 2,000. Incomprehensible as it seemed that he would not be at the ball with the hussars who were to give for Panna Prazdika to spite the Uhlans who were giving a ball for their Panna Borzowska. He knew that he had to go from this clear, good world to somewhere where everything was nonsense and confusion. A week later, the leave came through. The hussars, his comrades not only of the regiment but of the brigade, gave Rostov a subscription dinner that cost them 15 rubles each. 2 bands played, 2 choruses sang songs. Rostov danced the tripak with Major Basov. Drunken officers tossed, embraced, and dropped Rostov. The soldiers of the 3rd Squadron also tossed him and shouted, "Hurrah!" Then Rostov was laid in a sleigh and accompanied to the first posting station. For half the journey, as always happens, from Kremenchug to Kiev, all Rostov's thoughts still lay behind him in his squadron. But having passed the midpoint, he began to forget the troika of greys, his sergeant major, and Panna Borzowska, and began to ask himself uneasily what he would find at Otradno and how it would be. The closer he came, the more strongly, far more strongly, as if moral feelings was also subject to the law of attraction, which increases in inverse proportion to the square of the distance. He thought of his home. At the last station before Otradno, he gave the driver 3 rubles for vodka and soon, breathless as a boy, was running up the front porch of the house. After the raptures of meeting and after the strange feeling of dissatisfaction compared with what one expected, it's all just the same. Why was I hurrying so? Nikolai began to live his way into his old world of home. His father and mother were the same, only a little older. What was new in them was a sort of anxiety and sometimes disagreement which had never happened before, and which, as Nikolai soon learned, came from the bad state of their affairs. Sonia was already going on 20. She had already stopped growing prettier. Nothing more was promised than what was there. But even that was enough. She breathed out happiness and love from the moment Nikolai arrived, and the faithful, unshakable love of this girl had a gladdening effect on him. Petya and Natasha surprised Nikolai most. Petya was now a big, handsome 13-year-old boy, merry and wittily mischievous, whose voice was already breaking. For Natasha, Nikolai looked at her for a long time, wondering and laughing. Not her at all, he said. What, worse? On the contrary, there's sort of a dignity, a princess, he said to her in a whisper. Yes, 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 Natasha said joyfully. Natasha told him about her romance with Prince Andrei, his visit to Otradno, and showed him his last letter. Well, are you glad? Asked Natasha. I'm so calm and happy now. Very glad, Nikolai replied. He's an excellent man. Well, are you very in love? How shall I tell you? Natasha replied. I was in love with Boris, with my teacher, with Denisov, and this is not the same at all. I feel peaceful, firm. I know that there's no one better than he, and I feel so calm, so good now. Not at all like before. Nikolai expressed his displeasure at the wedding being put off for a year, but Natasha fiercely attacked her brother, proving to him that it could not be otherwise, that it would be bad to enter the family against the father's will, that she herself wanted it that way. You don't understand it at all. Not at all, she said. Nikolai fell silent and agreed with her. Her brother often wondered, looking at her. It did not seem at all as if she was a loving fiancée separated from her future husband. She was level-headed, calm, and altogether as cheerful as before. This surprised Nikolai, and it even made him look distrustfully at this alliance with Bolkonsky. He did not believe that her fate was already decided, the less so as he had not seen her together with Prince Andrei. He kept thinking there was something wrong with this projected marriage. Why the postponement? Why no betrothal, he thought. Talking with his mother once about his sister, he found to his surprise, and partly to his satisfaction, that deep in her heart his mother also sometimes looked mistrustfully at this marriage. Here he writes, she said, showing her son Prince Andrei's letter with that hidden feeling of ill will a mother always has against her daughter's future marital happiness. He writes that he won't come before December. What can be keeping him? It must be illness. His health is very weak. Don't tell Natasha. Never mind her cheerfulness. She's living out the last of her girlhood, but I know what happens to her each time a letter comes from him. But anyhow, God willing, all will be well, she concluded each time. He's an excellent man. Section 2. In the initial time of his visit, Nikolai was serious and even dull. He suffered from the impending necessity of intervening in these stupid matters of estate management for which his mother had summoned him. To get the burden off his shoulders, on which the third day of his visit, angry, scowling, not answering Natasha's questions of where he was going, he went to the wing to see Mitenka and demand a full accounting from him. What this full accounting was, Nikolai knew still less than the frightened and bewildered Mitenka. The conversation in the accounting with Mitenka did not last long. The head man, the delegate, and the village clerk, who were waiting in the front hall of the wing, listened at first with fear and satisfaction to the sound of the young count's rapping voice rising higher and higher, pouring out terrible and abusive word one after another. Robber, ungrateful creature, cut you to pieces like a dog. Not dealing with Papa, thievery, Rasil. And then the same people, with undiminished satisfaction and fear, saw how the young count, all red with bloodshot eyes, dragged Mitenka out by the scruff of the neck, chose a convenient moment between his words, applied foot and knee with great deftness to his rear end, and shouted, Out, scoundrel, and don't leave a trace behind. Mitenka flew headlong down the 6 steps and ran off into the flower garden. This flower garden was a well-known place of refuge for wrongdoers in Otradno. Mitenka himself, when coming back drunk from town, hid in this flower garden, and many inhabitants of Otradno, hiding from Mitenka, knew the saving power of this flower garden. Mitenka's wife and sisters-in-law stuck their frightened faces into the front hall from behind the door to their room, where a clean samovar was boiling and the steward's bed rose up high under its patchwork quilt. The young count, breathless, paying no attention to them, walked by with resolute strides and went into the house. The countess, learning at once through the maids of what had happened in the wing, was on the one hand calmed by the reflection that their situation should now be set to rights, but on the other hand was troubled by the thought of how her son would put up with it. She tiptoed to his door several times, listening as he smoked one pipe after another. The next day the old count called his son aside and told him with a timid smile, "You know, dear heart, you needn't have flown into a temper. Mitenka has told me everything." I knew, thought Nikolai, that I'd never understand anything here in this foolish world. You got angry that he hasn't written down those 700 rubles, but he has carried them over and you didn't look at the next page. Papa, he's a blackguard and a thief. I know it. What's done is done, but if you don't want it, I won't say anything to him. No, dear heart. The count was also embarrassed. He felt he had managed his wife's estate poorly and was guilty before his children, but he did not know how to set things to right. No, I ask you to take care of things. I'm old. No, Papa, forgive me if I've caused you unpleasantness. I'm less capable than you are. Devil take them, these muzhiks, and money and carrying over to the next page, he thought. I used to understand something about doubling on a 6-card run, but about carrying over on pages I know nothing, he said to himself. And from then on he did not enter into the business any more. Only once the Countess summoned her son, informed him that she had a promissory note for 2,000 from Anna Mikhailovna, and asked Nikolai how he thought of acting upon it. Here's how, Nikolai replied. You told me it depends on me. I don't like Anna Mikhailovna, and I don't like Boris, but they've been our friends and they're poor. So here's how. He tore up the note, and this action caused the old countess to burst into tears of joy. After that, the young Rostov, not entering into such business anymore, with passionate enthusiasm took up the occupation, new for him, of hunting with dogs, which the old count managed on a grand scale. Section 3. It was already turning winter. Morning frost gripped the earth moistened by autumn rains. The winter wheat was already tufting up and stood out bright green against the strips of brownish, cattle-trampled winter stubble and pale yellow summer stubble with red strips of buckwheat. The hilltops and woods, which at the end of August were still green islands among the black winter croplands and stubble, had become golden and bright red islands amidst the bright green winter crops. The hares were already half shed their summer coats. The fox cubs were beginning to disperse, and the young wolves were bigger than dogs. It was the best time for hunting. The dogs of the ardent young hunter Rostov had not only reached good hunting form, but were so footsore that at a general council of hunters it was decided to give the dogs a 3-day rest and move off on the 16th of September, beginning in Oak Grove, where there was an intact family of wolves. This was where things stood on the 14th of November. All that day the hunt stayed at home. It was frosty and biting, but in the evening it became overcast and turned warmer. On the 15th of November, when young Rostov in his dressing gown glanced out the window in the morning, he saw a morning in that which nothing could be better for hunting. It was as if the sky was melting and without wind descending to the earth. The only movement in the air was the slow movement from above to below of descending microscopic drops of mist or fog. Transparent drops hung on the bare branches of the garden and dripped onto the just fallen leaves. The soil in the kitchen garden, glistening wet and black as poppy seed, merged into the near distance with the dull and damp curtain of the mist. Nikolai went out to the wet, mud-tracked porch. There was a smell of fading leaves and dogs. The black-spotted, broad-haunched bitch Milka, with big, black, bulging eyes, seeing her master, got up, stretched her hind legs, and lay down, hare-like, then suddenly jumped up and licked him right on the nose and mustache. Another borzoi, seeing his master from the garden path, rushed headlong, arching his back towards the porch, and raising his stern tail, began to rub himself against Nikolai's legs. Halloo! Just then, that inimitable hunting call, which unites in itself the deepest bass and highest tenor, and around the corner came the head kennelman and huntsman, Danilo, a wrinkled old hunter, his gray hair cut around in Ukrainian fashion, a hooked hunting whip in his hand, and with that expression of independence and scorn for everything in the world that only hunters have. He took off his Circassian hat before his master and looked at him scornfully. This scorn was not offensive for the master. Nikolai knew that this Danilo, who scorned everything and was above everything, was still his serf and his hunter. Danilo, said Nikolai, timidly sensing that at the sight of this hunting weather, these dogs and his hunter, he was already being seized by that irresistible hunting feeling in which a man forgets all his former intentions, like a lovesick man in the presence of his beloved. What orders, Your Excellency? Asked a Proctodeacon's bass, hoarse from hallooing, and the two black, brilliant eyes looked from under their brows at the silent master. You can't stand it, these eyes seemed to say. A pretty nice day, eh? For a chase and a gallop, eh? Said Nikolai, scratching Milka behind the ears. Danilo did not reply and blinked his eyes. I sent Uvarka to listen at dawn, his bass said after a moment's silence. He said she transferred them to the Otradno Reserve. They were howling there. Transferred meant that the she-wolf they both knew about had gone with her cubs to the Otradno woods, which was 1.5 miles from the house and was a small reserve. We've got to go then, said Nikolai. Meet me here with Uvarka. As you say, sir. And hold off the feeding. Yes, sir. 5 minutes later, Danilo and Uvarka were standing in Nikolai's great study. Though Danilo was of small stature, seeing him in the room produced an impression similar to seeing a horse or a bear standing there in the midst of the furniture and accessories of human life. Danilo felt in himself and, as usual, stayed near the door, trying to speak softly. Though Danilo was of small stature, seeing him in the room produced an impression similar to seeing a horse or a bear standing in the midst of the furniture and accessories of human life. Danilo felt it himself, and, as usual, stayed near the door, trying to speak softly, not moving, so as not to break anything, somehow, in his master's room, trying to say everything as quickly as possible and get out of into the open, from under the ceiling to under the sky. Having finished his questioning and extorted from Danilo the admission the dogs were all right, Danilo himself wanted to go, Nikolai ordered the horses saddled, but Danilo was just about to leave when Natasha, not yet dressed, her hair still undone, in her nanny's big shawl, came into the room with quick steps. Petya ran in with her. You're going? Said Natasha. I just knew it. Sonia said you wouldn't. I knew that on a day like this you couldn't help going. We're going, Nikolai said reluctantly, being intent on something serious wolf hunting that day and not wanting to bring Natasha and Petya along. We're going, but only for wolves. You'd be bored. You know it's my greatest pleasure, said Natasha. That's not nice. You're going yourself. You've ordered the horses saddled, and you haven't told us anything. Vain are all barriers to Russians. We're going, cried Petya. But you're not allowed. Mama said you're not allowed, said Nikolai, turning to Natasha. No, I'm going. I'm certainly going, Natasha said resolutely. Danilo, order horses saddled for us, and have Mikhailo ride out with my pack. She turned to the huntsman. And if being in the room like that seemed improper and burdensome to Danilo, having any sort of dealing with a young lady seemed simply impossible to him. He lowered his eyes and hurried out as if it had nothing to do with him, trying not to injure the young lady somehow accidentally. Section 4. The old count, who always maintained an enormous hunt, having now handed the whole hunt over to his son's keeping, on that day of the 15th of September, feeling quite cheered up, made ready to go with them. An hour later, the entire hunt was on the porch. Nikolai, with a stern and serious air, showing that it was no time for bothering with trifles, walked past Natasha and Petya as they were telling him something. He examined all parts of the hunt, sent a pack and some hunters ahead to circle around, mounted his chestnut Don stallion, and whistling up the dogs of his pack, set out across the threshing floor to the field leading to the Otradno Reserve. The old count's horse, a sorrel gelding named Viflyanka, was led by the count's groom. The count himself was to drive directly to the covert assigned to him in a little droshky. In all, 54 hounds were led out under the 6 kennelmen and whippers in. Besides the gentlemen, there were 8 borzoi handlers, around whom roamed more than 40 borzois, so that with the gentlemen's packs, there were about 130 dogs in the field and 20 mounted hunters. Each dog knew its master and its name. Each hunter knew his task, place, and purpose. As soon as they went out beyond the field, everyone, with no noise or talk, spread out evenly and calmly along the road and field leading to the Autrino woods. As over a plush carpet, the horses walked over the field, splashing in puddles now and then as they descended the roads. The misty sky went on imperceptibly, and even descending to the earth, the air was still, warm, and soundless. Now and then came the whistle of a hunter, the snort of a horse, the crack of a whip, or the squeal of a hound strayed from its place. They had not yet ridden a mile when the Rostov hunt was met by another 5 riders with dogs emerging from the mist. At their head rode a fresh, handsome old man with big gray mustaches. "Greetings, uncle," said Nikolai when the old man rode up to him. "Right you are, I just knew," the old man began. He was a distant relation, a none too wealthy neighbor of the Rostovs. "I just knew that you wouldn't stay home, and it's a good thing you didn't. Right you are." This was the uncle's favorite saying. "Take the reserve at once, because my Gurchik told me that the Illigans are at Korniki with their hunt. They'll snatch the litter. Right you are, right out from under your nose." "That's where I'm going. Shall we combine the packs?" asked Nikolai. "Combine?" The hounds were united into a single pack, and the uncle and Nikolai rode side by side. Natasha, wrapped in shawls, from which her lively face peeked out with its bright eyes, wrapped up to them, accompanied by Petya, who never left her side, and Mikhailo, a hunter and riding master, who was assigned to look after her. Petya laughed at something and whipped and pulled his horse. Natasha adroitly and competently set her black Arab cheek, and with a sure hand effortlessly reined him in. The uncle glanced disapprovingly at Petya and Natasha. He did not let combining play with the serious business of hunting. "Greetings, uncle, we're coming too," cried Petya. "If it's greetings, but don't go trampling the dogs," the uncle said sternly. "Nikolenka, what a lovely dog Trunila is. He recognized me," Natasha said of her favorite hound. "First of all, Trunilo's not a dog, he's a bloodhound," thought Nikolai. He glanced sternly at his sister, trying to make her feel the distance that should separate them at that moment. Natasha understood it. "Don't think that we'll get in anybody's way, uncle," said Natasha. "We'll stay in our place and will not move." "And a good thing too, little countess," said the uncle. "As long as you don't fall off your horse," he added, "because right you are, there's not much there to hold on with." The island of the Autrino Reserve could be seen about 200 yards away, and the kennelmen were approaching it. Rostov, having come to a final decision with the uncle about where to set on the hounds, pointing Natasha to a place where she could stand and where nothing could ever run out, he went to circle around about the ravine. "Well, dear nephew, you're up against a seasoned one," said the uncle. "Mind you, don't go petting him." "We'll see," replied Rostov. "Kare, Phuit," he cried, answering his uncle's words with this call. Kare was an ugly and whiskery old he-dog, famous for having gone against a seasoned wolf. Everybody took their places. The old count, knowing his son's hunting ardor, hurried so as not to be late, and before the kennelmen managed to reach their places, Ilya Andrich, merry, red-cheeked, with quivering jowls, rode up with his black horses across the green winter wheat to the covert left for him, and having straightened his fur jacket and put on his hunting gear, mounted his sleek, well-fed, placid, and kind Viflenka, and gone as gray as himself. The horses and droshky were sent away. Count Ilya Andrich, who, though not a hunter at heart, had a firm knowledge of the rules of hunting, rode to the edge of the bushes where he was to stand, straightened out the reins, settled in the saddle, and feeling himself ready, looked around, smiling. Next to him stood his valet, Semyon Chekmar, an old horseman now grown heavy in the saddle. Chekmar held in leash 3 wolfhounds, spirited but grown fat like their master and his horse. 2 clever old dogs lay down without a leash. 100 paces away, inside the edge of the woods, stood the count's other groom, Mitka, a desperate horseman and passionate hunter. The count, by ancient habit, drank a silver thimble of hunter's spice brandy, had a bite to eat, and washed it down with a half bottle of his favorite Bordeaux. Ilya Andreevich was slightly flushed from the wine and the driving. His eyes, veiled with moisture, had a special glitter, and wrapped in his fur coat, sitting in his saddle, he had the look of a child made ready to go for a walk. The thin, hollow-cheeked Chekmar, having set everything up for himself, kept glancing at his master, with whom he had lived in perfect harmony for 30 years, and understanding his pleasant state of mind, expected some pleasant conversation. A third person also rode up cautiously. Clearly he had already learned his lesson, from behind the woods, and stopped behind the Count. This person was a tall, gray-bearded man in a woman's coat and tall hat. He was the buffoon Natasha Ivanovna. Well, Natasha Ivanovna, the Count said in a whisper, winking at him, if you frighten the beast away, Danilo will give it to you. I'm a big boy myself, said Nastasia Ivanovna. Shh, the Count shushed and turned to Semyon. Have you seen Natalia Ilyinichna? He said to Semyon. Who is she? Or where is she? She and Pyotr Ilyich are standing across from the Zaro thicket, Semyon replied, smiling. She may be a lady, but she knows a lot about hunting. Aren't you amazed at how she rides, Semyon? Said the Count. The equal of any man. How could I not be amazed? She's bold, skillful. And where's Nikolashka? Over at the Lyadovsky knoll, is he? The Count went on, asking in a whisper. Just so, sir. He knows where to stand. He's got a fine knowledge of horsemanship. Me and Danilo just marvel sometimes, said Semyon, knowing how to please his master. Rides well, eh? And how he sits a horse, eh? A real picture, like the other day when we chased a fox from the Zavarsinsky thicket. The master went hurtling to cut off the forest, something fearsome. 1,000-ruble horse, but the rider's priceless. Yes, a fine fellow. Like that, it's hard to find. Hard to find, repeated the Count, obviously sorry that Semyon had stopped talking so soon. Hard to find, he said, pulling back the skirt of his jacket and taking out his snuff box. The other day, when he came out of the church in full regalia, Mikhail Sidorovitch, Semyon did not finish, hearing in the still air the clear music of no more than 2 or 3 hounds baying in pursuit. Inclining his head, he listened, frowned silently to his master. They've struck on the litter, he whispered. They're heading straight for the Lyadovsky knoll. The Count, forgetting to wipe the smile from his face, looked straight into the distance. Forgetting to wipe the smile from his face, he looked straight into the distance along the line of trees and held the snuff box in his hand without taking a pinch. Following the dog's barking came the bass sound of Danilo's horn, calling after the wolf. The pack joined the first 3 dogs, and one could hear the baying of the hounds in full cry, with that special yelping that signals the pursuit of a wolf. The kennelmen no longer shouted, but hallooed, and Danilo's voice rose above all the others, now bass, now piercingly shrill. Danilo's voice seemed to fill the whole woods, emerge and spread far across the field. Silently listening for a few seconds, the Count and his groom realized that the hounds had broken up into 2 packs. One, big one, baying with particular fervor, began to move away. The other part of the pack raced through the woods past the Count, and in this pack Danilo's hallooing could be heard. These 2 chases merged, alternated, but both were moving away. Semyon sighed, bent down to straighten the leash in which a young dog had become entangled. The Count also sighed and noticed the snuff box in his hand, opened it and took a pinch. Back! Semyon shouted at a dog that had stepped out of the bushes. The Count gave a start and dropped his snuff box. Nastasia Ivanovna dismounted and went to pick it up. The Count and Semyon looked at him. Suddenly, as often happens, the sound of the chase instantly drew close, as if the dogs' baying muzzles and Danilo's hallooing were just in front of them. The Count turned, and to his right saw Mitka, who was looking at the Count with popping eyes and raising his cap, was pointing ahead of him to the other side. Look out! He cried in a voice that made it clear that this word had been asking long and painfully to be let out. And releasing his dogs, he galloped towards the Count. The Count and Semyon leaped out of the bushes, and to their left saw a wolf, which, swaying softly, was moving at a gentle lope to the left of them, towards the same bushes by which they were standing. The angry dogs squealed and, loosened from their leashes, raced towards the wolf past the horse's legs. The wolf slowed his flight, turned his big brown head towards the dogs, awkwardly as if suffering from angina, and swaying just as softly, leaped once, twice, and with a wag of his tail disappeared into the bushes. At that same moment, from the bushes opposite, with a baying that sounded like a lament, perplexedly leaped one hound, a second, a third, and the whole pack raced across the field to the same place where the wolf had gone through. After the hounds, the hazel bush parted, and Danilo's brown horse appeared. dark with sweat. On its long back, in a little lump, thrown forward, sat Danilo, hatless, his gray hair tousled above his red, sweaty face. "Halloo! Halloo!" he cried. When he saw the Count, his eyes flashed lightning. He cried, raising his whip threateningly at the Count. "You be the wolf, some hunters." And then, as if not deeming the abashed, frightened Count worthy of further conversation, he whipped the hollow, wet flanks of his brown gelding with all the anger he had prepared for the Count, and raced after the hounds. The Count stood as if punished, looking around, trying with a smile to evoke some sympathy for his position and Semyon, but Semyon was no longer there. He was circling around the bushes to cut the wolf off from the timber. On both sides, the boar's eye men came leaping after the beast, but the wolf got through the bushes, and not one hunter intercepted him. And that is where we will stop it for today. I kind of feel bad for the Rostovs because they seem lovely, but it's like that thing of like these old rich families who don't actually know how to properly manage their money or their estates, and they just get into these habits of like gross spending that end up leading to their financial ruin. And even just like the fact that Nikolai is supposed to be like the young man of the house, and he comes home and the only thing he does about setting books to straight is like yell at one guy, and then that's it. Like, okay. And his dad's so sweet, but he's clearly like very clueless. So I love that he's just like at this hunt, drinking, gonna have a little snuff, and totally like doesn't intercept the wolf or helpful at all, and whatever. Oh well. Well, we'll pick it up tomorrow, see where things go. Check out the links at the end of the video, in the description of the video. You know, see how you can get involved, and stay safe and loving out there, people. Have a great day. I'll see you all tomorrow.